Today, I'm doing something a little different. I'm going to be opening up and sharing about my personal healing journey on how I went from chronically fatigued, inflamed, and frustrated to finally finding hope and healing with my Hashimoto's and my autoimmune condition. I have shared in the past, and if you listen to the introduction, that it took me about 5 years and three different doctors to finally get that Hashimoto's diagnosis. And in the beginning, I was really not doing well. I was sleeping a lot more than normal. I got my diagnosis at a time in life when I was struggling a little bit with career challenges and changes and was working multiple part-time seasonal jobs, didn't have a really long-term full-time career, which I think, frustration over that definitely was contributing in part to my symptoms. But, just things were not going great for me. And so I'm going to talk with you a little bit about how I finally found that hope and healing and a little bit about my journey in order to help inspire you. Because I know that while I've mentioned bits and pieces of it, the main focus of this podcast has been talking with other people about their journeys. And so I'd like to share with you today in a little more detail a little bit about my journey. So, whether you've been diagnosed with Hashimoto's like me, whether you've got lupus, celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, or something else, or maybe you're just dealing with mysterious symptoms that no one seems to understand, I hope this episode encourages you, inspires you, and reminds you that you are not alone. Because that is one of the reasons, big reasons, that I created this podcast was to help people realize you're not alone. There are solutions to your problems, and there are people who understand where you are, who have been there, and they are able to help and support you. So, the first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about my diagnosis story. So, my journey really started years before I had a diagnosis. In fact, by the time I finally got my diagnosis, my doctor told me that I had had that diagnosis for about, or I'd had that Hashimoto's for probably about 5 years, and maybe thyroid problems for even longer than that. And it just took a while for a variety of reasons. And at that time, I was constantly exhausted. Even after 9 or 10 hours of sleep, I'd wake up in the morning still exhausted, would have to force myself to work or do other things, and then would always want to have a nap. And I had digestive issues, a little bit of anxiety, but not severely. I had some unexplained rashes. I had some brain fog, you name it. But every time I went to a doctor, they'd tell me my labs were normal or offer a prescription just to manage the symptoms. So they didn't really ever offer any real help. And I really struggled just to even get that diagnosis. And it wasn't until 2018 that I finally got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, an autoimmune thyroid condition. And honestly, at that time, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that I had a name for what was happening, but also fear, confusion, and overwhelm. I had been taking thyroid medication for already a few years before that, but deep down, I knew that there was going to be some other things that I needed to do, and I really wanted to heal. And I was working with a naturopathic doctor, so he offered some additional things as far as like supplement testing, food sensitivity testing, a few things like that. But a lot of that stuff was, pretty expensive. And the doctor I was working with, his office was a whole hour away from my house just because that was the only one I could find that would finally listen and finally figure out how to get me a diagnosis. And I had studied health coaching through the Institute of Integrated Nutrition, and I actually had my health coaching certificate for about 3 years. So it's like I know quite a bit about food and about healthy lifestyles and how to change and how to incorporate holistic healing into autoimmune. And, now this was actually happening to me. So, for the most part, I basically just took the bull by the horn, so to speak, and started, experimenting with different things, learning all I could, and started to try to help myself to some degree. Although I did eventually end up I've been through a couple of different functional medicine, holistic doctors that have been able to help me. The doctor who originally diagnosed me went out of practice for quite some time. Now he's back doing in-home treatments, but he does some different kinds of things. So at the moment, he's not really a fit. So I have, a different doctor now that I work with who's really good. And, now I don't have any troubles getting the right labs done just because I've had that autoimmune diagnosis. So they know I've had it. So it's not that big a deal. But at the time, it just was like pulling teeth just to get a diagnosis. So if any of you are out there are feeling that, I feel for you and I totally understand where you're coming from. Okay, so looking back, that said, there are obviously some things that I wish that I had done differently. At first, I thought, that maybe the thyroid medication would, over time, actually help improve some of my symptoms, things like that. But the reality is, because I had autoimmune, it really didn't. And, I tried a lot of different supplements, things that I found online that I was researching, tried, a lot of different things, including even going to some functional medicine doctors who I felt like just gave me too many supplements. And, that's a whole topic in and of itself. But the reality is that a lot of us get sucked into this trap with autoimmunity of taking really too much. And there really are some core things. I would say probiotics, collagen, and making sure that you have enough vitamin D, B12, zinc, vitamin C, and really in a lot of ways doing some kind of a formal analysis to determine what kinds of supplements you potentially need. So that's where things like doing a hair analysis, which if you haven't listened to my interview with Corey B about hair analysis, you probably want to go back and check that out. Different ways to determine what are you really deficient in before you just start popping the pills and supplements, because I find that too often a lot of the holistic and functional medicine doctors drag you into this hole of a pill for an ill, but instead of it being a pharmaceutical, it's a supplement for an ill. And a lot of times we really just get on too much and we just really don't need all that stuff. And the other thing I also did is I followed some diets that were pretty restrictive without really understanding what my body needed. So that's the other thing too, was I would start by the three devils, as we like to call it, getting rid of the gluten, the dairy, and the sugar. And just do that in the beginning and see how your body responds to that. And then maybe try doing things where you just don't eat processed food, you eat only real whole foods. Personally, I find that doing mostly about a 90% paleo is what really works for me. What I say by that is that I do still occasionally eat, a little piece of gluten-free bread or something, or a little bit of brown rice, or, some gluten-free pasta, things like that do have grains that are not fully paleo, but I stick, with mostly paleo, which is grain-free, and, eating your fruits, your vegetables, your meats, your eggs, things like that. And that is what mostly works for me. And I find that that's a pretty good guide for a lot of autoimmune, but you really want to be careful and, don't get carried away with anything that's too restrictive. This is one of the reasons the actual autoimmune paleo is something I'm not really a big fan of for anything more than maybe a detox for a month or so. Because I feel like you can help develop eating disorders and can cause all kinds of issues if you go off too many things that are too restrictive. Then the other thing is I was also focused on my physical symptoms too much that I ignored my actual emotional health and my emotional healing. And so you want to think about is that healing isn't just about food or pills, it's about everything. And that was a big lesson that I had to learn the hard way in the beginning. So what actually changed? So there were a couple of things. I started really doing some more research into the emotional healing side of things. And 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, when I started this podcast, I started talking to a lot of other people, and I learned a lot from a lot of the people that I interviewed. And in a lot of ways, this podcast has been really therapeutic for me, and I've learned quite a bit about things like gut health and detoxification, adrenal support, how food could be powerful medicine, and also learned about some of the challenges with what are called goiter-centric foods and your thyroid. And this is something that I learned from Andrea Beeman when I actually went through her online health coaching course on healing your thyroid. So that's a really good one as well. I can include that in the resources. I also started using more essential oils for different things, and no, they were not a cure for anything autoimmune or thyroid or anything like that, but was more to help support my emotions as an alternative for toxic skincare products, toxic cleaners, things like that. Started doing red light therapy and also infrared sauna, and started, doing a little more of the functional medicine testing. And I learned how to listen to my body instead of fighting against it. But more than anything, I actually started to believe that healing was possible. And that mindset shift made all the difference. So I'd like you to stop right here now and ask yourself, do you really believe that healing from your autoimmune condition is possible? Because if you don't really believe it's possible, then you might as well even stop listening right now to me or any of the other guests, because you're just not going to do what it's going to take if you don't believe it's actually possible. So now I'd like to share with you 7 different lessons that I've learned on my healing journey, and I have some additional blog posts. If you go and check out my blog at annalaurabrown.com, talking about some more specifics. But here are 7 of the basic and biggest lessons I've learned. Number 1, healing is not linear. You'll have good days and bad days, and that's okay. Number 2, your body is always communicating with you. Symptoms aren't the enemy, they're messages. Number 3, food can be medicine or it can fuel inflammation. What you eat matters. Number 4, you have to be your own advocate. No one cares about your health more than you do. Number 5, self-care is not selfish, it's a requirement. Rest, boundaries, and joy are essential. Number 6, stress is a major trigger. Emotional healing is just as important as physical healing. Number 7, progress over perfection. You don't have to do everything perfectly to get better, just keep going. So then let me summarize and repeat those again, since I think it bears repeating. Number 1, healing is not linear. Number 2, your body is always communicating with you. Number 3, food can be medicine or it can fuel inflammation. Number 4, you have to be your own advocate. Number 5, self-care is not selfish, it's a requirement. Number 6, stress is a major trigger. And number 7, progress over perfection. You don't have to do everything perfectly to get better. Now, let's talk a little bit about what I wish I knew sooner. So, I could probably do a whole separate episode on this, and maybe at some point I will. But the biggest thing I wish is that someone had told me that healing takes time and there's no magic pill. I feel like deep down in my gut, I probably knew this, but I don't think I really realized it as much. And that it was going to take a little longer than I would have thought, than I would have hoped. But, I'm definitely not giving up, and neither should you. And I wish I knew that gut health plays a role in almost every autoimmune condition. This is something that I didn't realize in the beginning, but now realize that I have to prioritize that. And I wish I trusted my instincts earlier instead of waiting for doctors to figure it out. I started trusting my instincts more towards the end, which is what pushed me to finally get a diagnosis. But I realized if I had trusted my instincts even more, I probably could have even had a diagnosis sooner. And I wish I'd started building a support system sooner, because community matters more than you realize. And that's one of the things that I strive to create here with this podcast with Autoimmune Rehab, is to create more community and give you more resources, people that you can connect with, to help you realize that healing is possible and to help assist you with that healing. So now I'd like to invite you a little bit here to help hopefully encourage you that if you're listening to this and feeling overwhelmed, please know you're not crazy and you're not broken. You can heal. It may not look like a straight line, and it may take longer than you want, but your body is capable of amazing things when given the right tools and support. You are strong, you are not alone, and your story is still being written. So if this episode has resonated with you, I'd love to connect with you. You can follow me on Instagram or leave me a DM, as I do read them all and will respond to them at Anna Laura Brown Wellness. You can also grab a free copy of my Autoimmune Wellness Daily Checklist or my Thyroid Health Calendar by visiting the link in the show notes or going to my blog, annalaurabrown.com. And if you're ready for some deeper support or would just like to connect, let's do your free autoimmune wellness consultation. You'll find the link in the show notes there. And let's just chat about what I can do to help you. And, if I'm not the right fit or what I have doesn't quite work, I have a huge network of people, especially from all the different guests that I've had on my podcast, that can help you out. And I'd also appreciate, just hearing your feedback on what you thought about today's episode.